So please don't ever be scared to tell people this is my goal. And that does help, get it out there. You don't necessarily have to say this is my goal because I'm super freaking stressed and I don't want everybody to know that. You can just say, "Hey guys, you know what? I decided that I'm going to start doing this." And the more people you tell, the more it comes back on not only a motivator for you, but kind of a personal check-in and standard for yourself.
Thank you for tuning in to the Critical Conversations podcast, brought to you by Mind the Frontline. Established in 2023 as a 501c3, Mind the Frontline is your ally in the journey to support those who selflessly safeguard our communities. Their core mission revolves around pioneering innovation and research, education, and overall well-being specifically tailored to healthcare, military, and public service frontline first responders. The Critical Conversation podcast is a dedicated space for police, fire, EMS, allied health workers, dispatchers, air medical, and military personnel, along with their families. Here, we dive into the heart of the matter, tackling essential topics such as mental health strategies, recovery methods, treatment options, the latest research, and professional development opportunities. Before we dive into today's episode on Critical Conversations, we do want to, however, acknowledge the nature of our discussions. Some of the content discussed may be triggering or intense as we explore the challenges and the triumphs within the first responder community. We recognize that these discussions may evoke strong emotions or memories. If you or someone you know is struggling and needs immediate support, we urge you to reach out to your agency's mental health resources or your local peer support group. In time of mental health crisis, you can always contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by phone or via text at 988. Please remember you are never alone and help is always available. At Mind the Frontline, we are more than just a podcast. We are a community committed to fostering resilience within the entire first responder family. So whether you're on the front lines or supporting those who are, we invite you to subscribe, engage, and be a part of this vital mission. To learn more, please visit us at www.mindthefrontline.org. Now let's dive into today's critical conversation. Welcome to another episode of the Critical Conversations podcast by Mind the Frontline, the podcast for first responders, mental health advocates, listeners, and our Mind the Frontline community members. In this episode, we're going to be discussing mental healing through movement and how to incorporate some small changes in your life for some really big impacts. Our guest speaker for this episode is Elizabeth Travis. Elizabeth is a seasoned healthcare professional with over 10 years of experience in personal training and over 8 years experience in both volunteer and paid EMS positions. She is driven by passion for a holistic health and wellness. Elizabeth is currently pursuing her doctorate in global health. We will hope to educate all of our listeners and the viewers of today's episode on how small changes can really just make big impacts on their mental health and well-being through movement. Today's episode is sponsored and brought to you by GYMS. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by the Journal of Emergency Medical Services. GYMS is dedicated to enhancing pre-hospital patient care and driving positive transformation within EMS by delivering cutting-edge information and education from industry leaders, changemakers, and emerging voices such as the Mind the Frontline podcast. GYMS empowers EMS providers, instructors, and administrators alike with a legacy editorial excellence and a network of subject matter experts. GYMS remains committed to delivering state-of-the-art, high-quality content to the EMS community. To learn more about how GYMS is shaping the future of EMS care, just visit their website today at www.gyms.com. Now, let's get moving and make some small changes with some big impacts on our mental health. Welcome, Elizabeth, to today's Critical Care podcast. How are you doing?
Hey, Chris, thanks. Yeah, I'm doing well. Big day, big things going on. Excited to be here and talk to you guys. So I'm excited to jump in and give some of my insights from working over the years and doing this and incorporating this with movement.
Yeah, well, I was looking at your bio before the show, and it's quite impressive. Not only have you kind of been working in personal training, but you've also been EMS, and now you're working towards your doctorate. Can you kind of let our listeners and viewers know just a little bit about you and what you have going on in life and kind of where your journey started?
Yeah, so actually, I was heavily overweight as a young adult. I was probably about 250 pounds, and that sprung me into personal training in college. I loved it. I'd always loved moving. I'd swam my whole life, big swimmer. So once I got into kind of movement and healing for myself on that level, I realized, I really do love medicine. I'd always been interested. My father's a physician, so that sprung me into EMS. And it was interesting when I got there. You see a lot, and on the job, we see a lot of people who are really stressed out. They're starting to gain weight. They think I'm moving all the time. I'm lifting patients. I don't understand what's happening to me, and it's a spiral cycle. So I worked probably towards the end of my EMS career as a lieutenant. I worked with several of the people from our agency to help them understand what was happening. Why are you feeling the way you're feeling? First off, why is this stressing you out? And two, how can we add that movement to help de-stress you and also help with your physical fitness, which helps with your mental fitness? It's a back and forth exchange, right? And then
Yeah.
that led to my global health. So my doctorate is a combination of bolstering EMS health and well-being as well as maternal services. So that's kind of the in and out of what got me here. It started with my own kind of I was very overweight down in the dumps and I felt the difference, once you start moving and you don't necessarily have to lose weight, that doesn't have to be the goal, but moving needs to be the goal.
Well, I think you look great now. So congratulations
Thanks.
on the weight loss. I,
Thanks.
I can absolutely kind of relate a little bit to that. A couple years ago before I started my recovery, man, I was probably the heaviest I've ever been at 240. And now I'm finally down to about 225 and trying to get back down to my flight weight of 215, but we'll see how that goes. But I continue to work on it every day, but I know how that makes me feel. And the cool thing is you're working towards your doctorate, which what better way of being service to not only your EMS community, but moms, helping moms kind of move around from the maternal kind of aspect of that. Because I know my wife, when she was pregnant with both of our kids, like movement became somewhat challenging, and she liked to kind of work out and she liked to maintain some of her physical fitness. But like, I like how you said movement doesn't have to necessarily be moving weights. For her, she was able to get in the pool and she loved it because that was like the only
Yep.
time she felt like she didn't have all this weight just crushing her frame. And for me, I would see the mental health benefits of her when she would get out of the pool, having a good little kind of doing what she could in there and doing some exercise and coming home. Like she just felt better. You could tell like the energy that she brought into the room was so much more measurable than, being cranky, pregnant, sore, bloated mom beforehand. So I have the utmost respect for you, mom, out there. But help us understand just a little bit about the mind body connection and kind of exploring that link between movement and mental health.
Right. So it's actually really interesting. A lot of people silo them, unfortunately, and I think that's just when we look at the research here, you have to silo something to get results, right? To see, but they're so interconnected. You know, just seeing how your brain reacts to your body's adjustment in small ways, like you mentioned, your wife in the pool swimming, and she just loved it. And it's part of just the overall understanding of decreasing those stress hormones, that cortisol, and increasing, your happy, feel good dopamine hormones. When we work out, we're releasing dopamine and we're actually decreasing our cortisol. And in moments of stress, it's incredibly important to remember these things and to just incorporate the mindset of, okay, I know it's a hormonal shift. I know I can combat it by doing these small little movement things, even just small breathing techniques I've talked to people about. Those are actually all part of movement. So it doesn't have to be a big shift, but it does affect the back end of your sympathetic nervous system. We talk about that fight or flight, and people think, oh, if I move around a ton, I'm going to stress myself out. Well, it's a different kind of stress, right? When we're on a shift, we are having high spikes of cortisol. And when we're working out, yes, we're stressing our body physically, but we're actually releasing happy hormones. So you have to think about the shift in the variances in what you're doing and combat those. And it can be challenging because you have to actively think it in the moment. Cortisol, it's kind of like a silent activator. You get in there and it starts working, it starts into your adrenals, and all of a sudden you're stressed, you know, and you think, how did I get here? How did I get so stressed? It's a gentle buildup. In the field, you can have the silent DVT, deep vein thrombosis, and no symptoms, and then all of a sudden you can't breathe, right? It's the same with
Yeah.
stress. it's a gradual build, especially chronic stress. Gradual build until we get to that point where we're thinking, why am I so stressed? All of a sudden I'm so stressed. Well, it's not all of a sudden.
All the alarms are going off and you're like, "Hey,
Yeah.
wait a minute, how did I get here?" And I kind of like how you put that because a lot of people just aren't aware, but like it releases a lot of good dopamine, and it's a good, healthy coping mechanism for stress because we like to, release dopamine, and sometimes we do that in negative ways that might cause us self harm. So I know that on the shifts that I had, one of the things I was pretty religious with while I was whether I was flying on an air medical helicopter or I was working at the fire department, was physical fitness and movement, right? Like I felt better. And I'm a morning kind of workout guy. So I would always like, if I didn't get my butt handed to me the night before on a 48, I would wake up that next morning and, make a quick breakfast and then get after it. And I just felt like my day went better. The calls that kind of came in, they weren't as heavy. But I also noticed like when I didn't do some of these things, because I do have depression, I suffer from depression, a treatment resistant depression, which is extremely struggling sometimes. It's really hard to move and even get the motivation because that cortisol, like you mentioned, like just keeps creeping in. And I remember at one of my cortisol checks right before I entered into recovery, it was extremely off the charts, to the point where it was very concerning for the physician. And they were like, "Hey, like we
Hmm.
got to do something. Like you are a walking atom bomb at this point." But I like how you mentioned, like, for example, like engaging physical movement is not just about keeping the body fit, it's also profoundly impacts our mental health and well-being. And I know the research has consistently shown a strong correlation between physical activity and improved mental health outcomes. And I've experienced that firsthand. Like if I'm working out, I'm going, like I did cardio this morning, and for me, it was like, oh shoot, I just felt a lot better and not being so stressed. And so you also look at just the studies demonstrating that regular exercise, having a routine can reduce those symptoms of anxiety and depression, like I just mentioned, I have, boost my mood, improve
Hmm.
cognitive function. And then you have the neuroscientific research that reveals that, like, it stimulates the release of neurotransmitters and the endorphins and the dopamine and the serotonin, which are known to play key roles in regulating our mood health and our mental well-being and reducing stress. So I think it underscores the importance of just movement, right? Just movement. And I'll even kind of throw on that because a lot of people just aren't aware of it. And I wasn't aware of it until I did an episode with Cindy Jones with BiTap. But she was like, "Hey, just by going for a walk," because I told her, like, "Hey, I always feel better after going for a walk." And she's like, "Well, you know what you're doing, Chris? Like, you're doing bilateral stimulation. Like, that's exactly what EMDR is. And that's exactly what and so the science is absolutely there."
Yeah, it's there, and it's crazy you mentioned, you feel so much better and we don't realize, the stressors that are around us. They did a study, 2017, I believe, they did a study talking about cortisol, and the test subjects, they weren't even EMS. They were just students, and they tested their cortisol before a stress event, which was a test for them. Everybody gets a little stressed about a test. Just a test for them. They tested their cortisol before and after, and they actually found that after that stress event, cortisol levels increased 9 times. Now, think about that in regard to what we're doing in EMS. um, it was seen in a study they did for dispatchers, telecommunicators. They did a randomized control study, pretty great study in about 2017 as well. And they found that just the call, I mean, there was, of course, variances, but just the phone ringing when they were taking calls significantly increased their stress. And that's before you add on, is this a trauma? You know, is this maybe a PD code, big stressful sentinel events? And if you're not if you're in the job for a while, you think to yourself, "I'm not that stressed." Even the little things, like grandma fell down in the middle of the night and went boom. But you
Yeah, I
do.
was one of
When
those
that call
providers.
goes
I was
off
like,
at
"Oh
night,
no,
you're
no."
actively woken up. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm fine. It's fine. Grandma, go down. But when you're actively woken up like that, you are stressed. Your cortisol levels are going to rise being awoken like that to that call because you don't know what the call is yet, right? The tone just drops and you think, "Oh, what now?" So yeah, you need to understand that. And like you said, the bilateral movement, when we talk about kind of some of the dopamine responses and the BDNFs, which we can go into a little bit, it's the brain derived neurotrophic factor. Basically just another happy hormone is what you're looking at here. you have to incorporate the small changes, and it doesn't have to be all at once. I talk to a lot of people in the job who say, well, I just don't have the time, you know, I just don't
Yeah, that's a
have the
common
30
excuse.
minutes. It's a common excuse. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes. I mean, the recommended movement is about 150 minutes of moderate intensity ish or a mix of movement a week. Nowhere does it say that you have to do all 150. And as a matter of fact, there's actually some research out there that indicates the smaller, like 10 to 15-minute workouts, are the same, if not a little bit better, in terms of decreasing some of those hormones and re regulating yourself, or doing workouts outside. Again, the power of just getting outdoors is very intense. There's a ton of new research going into this based on, just increased better oxygen, increased, sun exposure. Please wear your sunscreen. I will plug for that. But these things are important to regulating yourself. And if you add those into moving around, man, the benefits are just above and beyond. Imagine if your wife had gone swimming outside. Did you ever get to go swimming outdoors, like do laps outdoors, or did she do an indoor pool?
She would if it wasn't snowing outside while she was pregnant. Trust me, and I do think like early. I mean, because she was early in her pregnancy, I think around like June and August, we'd always go out on the boat. And if anybody boat knows me, like I am a huge proponent of going outdoors. It's one of my ways to reset my nervous system and decrease stress. Like this weekend, I had to check out and go camping with my dog again. Just because being outside, kind of moving around, walking around, hiking, setting up tent, things like that really just kind of help bring me back to center. But I also understand like those who are listening or watching this episode, it's a mental barrier sometimes, especially like when you are super stressed and you are depressed, like just finding
Mm-hmm.
that motivation to get up and get to the gym. But I'll tell you, I've never left the gym and said, oh man, I really wish I didn't go to the gym, afterwards. It's just like in the morning, like this morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. I'm kind of tired. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. And I was like, and then I tried some breathing techniques and I was like, nope, just get at it, because for me, I'm a big fan of habit stacking. It's one of the books, if you haven't read it yet, is a phenomenal book to read. But essentially, when we talk about habit stacking, it's, my brain wakes up in the morning. My next thing that I need to do, and I've trained myself, is just roll my feet off the bed, because as soon as they hit the floor, it's like the next thing is, okay, get a glass of water, get my clothes on, brush my teeth, off to the
Mm-hmm.
gym. And so those are habits that I've kind of combined into a kind of a habit stack, so to speak, where it does help me. And I have to do it, at least for me, knowing my day and knowing that I'm also a dad and there's life that goes on. I know my day is gonna get away from me, and I will come up with a million excuses of why not to work
Yep.
out or not get out and do something. And so this is why I'm a morning guy. And so I get my workout in the morning. It's like it's my time. It's self care for me. I'm investing in my time. And the nice thing is, like, I'll get in the pool sometimes over at the gym, or maybe I'll do some cardio or the elliptical, or just walk around the basketball court. And then I like to go sit in the sauna and the hot tub and kind of like de-stress a little bit. And that's when I do my morning like meditation and my daily readings and things like that. And I'll tell you, like I did this morning, I was feeling pretty stressed last night, as you're aware. But I woke up this morning like, okay, I'm stressed. I have a little anxiety. I got after it. I got my spinning at my house on my bike. We also have a rower. So these are little things that you can do. Just go for a walk outside. Sometimes I'll just take my dog and go around the block and then sit in the hot tub. Like just doing that sets my day up for so much just good energy. I get to bring that to everybody, not only my family members, but my partners, my coworkers, and more importantly, this podcast.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple interesting things. For anybody who's listening, yes, habit stacking is amazing. And you say, you get up, you do it in the morning, because we make excuses, right? We've all been there. I've been there myself. Get throughout the day, I'm like, I just don't want to move, right? It doesn't have to be a big thing. I mean, I am lucky enough. I have a little gym set up that my husband has, a cycle and everything. But sometimes it's just I just don't even want to do that. But I tell myself, if I just do 10 minutes of yoga, which is a phenomenal thing to do. There was actually a study that was conducted that basically showed movement based therapies. I consider yoga like a meditation, movement meditation for me, but movement-based therapies are beyond important, and they heavily decrease symptoms of anxiety and depression. That was a study done in 2020. But you don't have to have all the equipment, right? I think that's another big barrier you see from people. Oh, I don't have access to a gym, and people have told me I have to lift. I don't have
Yeah.
access to a bike, and I just read this study that I have to cycle. There's so much information out there telling you you need to do this because this is the best movement, or you need to do that. And honestly, the best movement is the one that you can complete.
Yeah.
That's it,
Some movement is better
you
than
know?
no movement. Like, and I used to travel a lot, right? I used to travel a lot for work, and going out and teaching some of these critical care courses when I owned IA Med. And for me, trying to find that workout time, or if I'm going camping, for example, like I'll bring
Yeah.
my kettlebell. I have little bands that are like $10, like they don't cost much. And worst case, if I don't have anything, I still got I got my dad bod to help me out, and so I
That's
can
right.
do calisthenics. I can do, little air squats. I can do push-ups. I can do calf raises. Like and I'll find things. You'll see me like grab a chair and use those as like shoulder lifts. Like there's things that you can incorporate. You don't need to have a fancy gym. You don't need to have any gym equipment, but I like that.
Yep.
You just the best exercise is the one that you can complete. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's the important part because you still get the benefits. It doesn't matter if you have the fancy gym equipment, the heavy weights, or just your dad bod. You still get the benefits of movement and dropping your serotonin, reducing increasing your serotonin, but dropping your cortisol levels, increasing your dopamine. Like you still get that benefit. It's just, you got to do something, folks. What you don't get benefit of is just sitting there and wallowing in that mental anguish and tormenting yourself and being up in your head. Like that doesn't, that's not beneficial for anybody. And so if you can, I mean, just do something in your house. There's so many free things out there. Like go to YouTube and just click in body weight exercises. I promise you will find hundreds of videos of things that you can do. And if you got a stopwatch, like now you can kind of make little training circuits where, hey, every 2 minutes I'm going to switch a routine and I'm going to go from air squats to push-ups for 2 minutes to whatever that is for 2 minutes. You can do chair dips, sofa dips, bed dips. Like there's ways to do this, and it doesn't have to take a lot.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It doesn't take much, and we have it all around us. So, I think it's really important for providers to understand across the continuum, right? I'm talking fire, PD, EMS, or telecommunicators across the continuum. I think by the end of the day, we're so drained and we're thinking we've moved so much and we've completed so much. I don't need to work out because I did a ton of calls today, right?
Yeah, I've
Um,
said that before.
it's okay. I'm not calling anybody out, but don't say that to yourself again. But it's different. So the intentionality of what you're doing is important as well. If you're out on a call and you're picking up a patient or you're moving around equipment, it's not the same. A lot of the times you're really not thinking about what you're doing. You're not in a good place mentally to de-stress. But you are when you get back to the station, maybe you finish that report, but then you look around, you go, well, we don't have a gym here. Like you said, we don't have this, but you do. You have your whole body. You have man, I've put together workouts with the wheelie chairs in the office. I've put together workouts on the trucks. You mentioned the bands. I used to have the little bands I would put in a tiny little like backpack I carried with me on the ambulance. It had bands, it had healthy snacks, and then if I was stuck on a call like standby, or we had a long drive back, I could use those bands in the front seat, sitting down. I don't, of course, always recommend a ton of sitting down, but you have to work with what you have, right? And incorporate it into what you're doing in the day. And it's always was really funny to me because I would do kind of these random one-off workouts, right? And people would go, "What are you doing? You're kind of
What are you
insane."
doing?
Yeah. What are you
What
what
kind
are
of
you doing?
witchcraft are you up to?
Right? Somebody be driving me back from, a hospital that was about 45 minutes away and I'm over there. I got these little bands. I'm doing kind of little back flies. What are you doing? I don't think I'm going to have time to work out this evening after my shift, so I'm doing it now. And it's funny to see it catches on, right?
It
And it's
does. You
really
get your partner,
fun.
they're like looking at you, you're like, hey, come on. I'll show you a couple of things. It doesn't take much. And they're just kind of like, they're always reluctant at first. They're like, I don't want to do this. You're crazy. But it's nice because, like, like you mentioned, like if you're doing standby, you're at a desk, dispatchers, physicians who may not get around very much, police
Mhm.
officers, even, law enforcement, like they're sometimes stuck in their patrol vehicle for hours. Just the simple thing of getting out and stretching, right? Like you can just
Yes.
stretch, just I think of, like, limber up, and
Ah,
ways to do that, because that's still movement. It may not be cardio, which is fine, but you're still moving and you're taking care of your body, and that's not so tight. And so when you sit there for hours on end, like I know my back is really kind of tight, and that kind of makes my quads tight, and then it makes me agitated because it inflames my back pain. And so if I can just take like little 5-minute breaks throughout the day and just do a little bit of light stretching in my own office, like it
mhm.
does. It helps. It's like, therapeutic throughout the day, and it keeps my cortisol levels consistently down, because maybe in 2 hours they've kind of come back up and crept up again. And it's like, okay, time to do some more stretching here.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting, people think immediate stress, right? But you have that chronic we all, everybody has that buildup of just the chronic stress. And what can you do? What can you build up and have it out, like you mentioned, to combat that? I mean, and it doesn't have to be, it can be little stuff. So, years and years ago, somebody asked me, I'm really overweight, and they asked me, how do you stay motivated, like, to keep doing all these things that you do during the day? And my answer was slightly morbid. I said, well, it's either I do this or I die in a way that I don't want to die. I mean, and that's kind of, we have some family history where, that's kind of what it is for me. I have to keep my body put together or else it's just going to decline. Or even looking into the future, I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do, right? And we see that a lot with EMS, back injuries. We see it in physicians who have knee problems because they're constantly moving in funny ways. And just every morning, before I went on the trucks, I would think, all right, today, every time I get on a truck, I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to think about my whole self in a situational awareness, because we're taught situational awareness, all of us. We have to be with patients and things like that. But
Yeah.
situational awareness to yourself is a whole new thing. So I would get off the truck as on a lift assist and I would think, okay, I'm going to intentionally lift with my legs, which we're taught, but how often do you remember to do that? When I
Do you
got
actually
back, I'd say,
practice it?
exactly. And when I got back, I'd say, okay, I'm going to stand and write my report on the hood of the truck. Little tiny stuff like that. When we would go to lunch, I'd be like, hey, I would drive. And I kind of hope people are watching this, but maybe not. I would intentionally park really far away so we had to walk. Be like, we're all getting some steps in today, but
No, and it
I
just,
know
hey, I
so many
take the
listeners.
stairs, and if I can, I'll
Yes.
take the stairs. I'll tell you, hey, tell my partner, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you just run the gurney down? I'll meet you down in the ambulance bay, and I would just take the stairwell down.
Yeah.
There's little things that you could do throughout your day, and if you forget, because I had to build the habits, and it takes time. Like I do recognize that it takes time to build these habits, and be consistent. So some of my strategies is, well, I got a smartwatch or a phone. And so I would set a timer for every 2 minutes or 2 hours. And so that way, when it
Mhm.
goes off, it's like, oh, because I know that I'll get into work mode and not even look up for several hours. And so just by having a timer go off every 2 hours, it reminds me, okay, ding, goes off. Next habit,
Yep.
stand up. Third habit, start stretching, right? So now I'm habit stacking with that. And as you do this, you start building these routines. And what you want to do to be successful, honestly, is do simple stuff and start there and just get the basics down. Just like we learned BLS, basic, airway skills, anything like that. You want to get the simplistic movements down and the habits and the routines. And that actually does make you more successful when you're more likely to continue it on, well beyond, the New Year's resolution, because I've already seen everybody from the gym, like, it's definitely dropped off. January was like, I couldn't find a freaking machine to save my life, even at 6 in the morning. And now it's like, oh, okay, it's kind of freed up a little bit. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I think if you have these good little routines that you can do, these little simple things, simple things lead to bigger things, but you have to take baby steps. You can't just like hold yourself accountable to like, oh, I'm going to lift 90. If it's not realistic to what you and your lifestyle are doing, then it's probably not going to work out. So make it realistic. Like when I started getting back into lifting and weights, I didn't go after the really, really heavy stuff because I wanted to, prove my ego and, to the guy next to me, or more importantly, a lot of the women nowadays, my gym, like they can whoop my ass. So, I'm over there just doing light weights, heavy, light weights, a lot of reps, but hey, I had to start back at the basics, and that led me to over time start, adding a little bit more weight on to those plates, or a little bit more reps, or maybe I'm walking a little bit further. Like you just can't expect you to jump back. Like for me, I was a swimmer. I can't expect that like I'm going to jump back in the pool today and go knock out 2,000 yards. It's just unrealistic. Hey, if I jump in the pool today and I get 600 yards in, dang, I'm cooking with gasoline, because that gave me the benefit that I'm looking for, which is what I'm really going for. Like, and I'm like you, like I just turned 40 this year. So I'm really, starting to, it's funny how that does, but you start looking at yourself like, okay, life is precious. It's a little bit more precious. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm now in that subcategory where I have friends that are, that have been diagnosed with cancer, going through cancer treatment. I've had friends that have tragically lost their lives to cardiovascular disease.
Yep.
And these are all things that I'm like, when I look at my 6-year-old, I'm like, well, I want to be here for another 20 years. I want to watch him get married. I want to watch him go through college. And so, for that, that's kind of one of my driving forces to when I get in my mind and it's like, hey, I'm not going to work out today. And I start doing all this, all these excuses, something that is really powerful for me, at least, is I want to be here for my family. And if I don't do this, more than likely, statistically, I'm not going to be. And I
Yeah.
hate to
And
be
everybody,
morbid, but that's the truth.
yeah. Yeah. That's why I said earlier, it's a little morbid, but it's the truth. And everybody has to find their own motivation. I told my friend, I said, I can't find your motivation for you. You have to find it. The only thing I can do for you is to help impress upon you the importance of a slow start. And a lot of people don't, they look at me, they're like, what do you mean a slow start? When I tell people to start moving, I'm talking about small, tiny starts. If you go in, like you said, if you go in and you think I'm going to lift 200-pound deadlift and I haven't lifted in 6 months, or, I'm going to be able to run a marathon in 4 months or whatever, we call them SMART goals. Those aren't SMART goals. Just
Yeah,
bluntly,
unrealistic goals.
yeah,
And
they're
you're just setting yourself up
unrealistic.
for failure, which then you'll basically start reiterating your negative self-talk of like, see, I told you so, you shouldn't have worked out.
Yeah, exactly. And people get so frustrated because they are thinking I should be able to do this. I used to be able to do this, or everybody else can do this. And I cannot stress upon people enough the harm it does to you to compare to somebody else's journey, whether it be a fitness journey or a mental health journey. The more you compare, the more you start to get you get stressed again. You get stressed
Mhm.
that you can't complete that activity. You get upset. You get depressed because maybe your goal is, maybe you are heavily overweight and your goal is, well, I want to lose some weight. You can't go in and say, I'm going to lose 20 pounds in 2 months, despite what the media has told people. If you try this diet or move this way, it's just not realistic. Everybody and everybody is different in that regard. So it's just very small actionable steps. And whether that be habit stacking or setting up an alarm on your phone. For me, it was, I love my morning coffee. And when I would be on shift, I would tell myself, I'm not going to have my morning coffee until I walk on the treadmill at work for 5 minutes. That was it. I mean, that was literally it. It was 5 minutes
There you
walking on
go.
the treadmill at work. And the
But here's
boost
the
that it gave
thing.
every morning.
Those benefits last for hours. That's the most important part,
Exactly.
but what you did is we need to set ourselves up for these little wins, because that also, it's like, getting to hearing the dinner bell and having this nice meal or whatever, our dopamine responds to that. So if I'm getting just a little win of, hey, I got up and I got a walk in, I walked around the station before I had my coffee, whatever that looks like, I stretched, I meditated, I
Hmm.
did some yoga, whatever that is like it's a little win. And if you can start stacking these little wins, and one of my mentors, Dr. Salim Razai, like, he's always been someone I've looked up to. But I remember when I was like, oh, I met like, why am I not, why are we not successful yet? Why have we not gotten out there? Because we just started out, and he had to remind me, hey, Chris, it's 1% a day. If you did
Yep.
1% better than yesterday, you're doing well, man. Like, and some days you're
Yeah.
going to have a step back, and it's how you recover and get that next little win. So look for the easy wins. Like, honestly, don't go for the big ones. Like, don't go for the
Yeah.
marathon. Just go for like, hey, I can walk for 5 minutes, or I can walk to the next telephone pole. Like, that's a little win, folks. Like, you don't need much. But when we talk about the science of movement and how physical activity actually impacts the brain function, the emotional regulation, and kind of delving into that science behind movement, it kind of sheds a little bit of light on the profound effects of the brain's function and emotional regulation techniques. When you look at the neuroscientific research, it definitely has revealed that, like, with this physical activity that me and Liz are talking about, the production of neurochemicals such as endorphins, which are natural painkillers. So, like,
Hmm.
I might say, hey, my back hurts, but I don't want to go work it out today because my back hurts. And I found myself doing that on Sunday. I was like, oh, I'm too sore. Nope, that's a good, that's a good way to go in,
Good
because it's just a
thing. Yeah.
natural painkiller, and it loosens me up. And so I get some fluid in there, I get some, some antibodies, and it start moving stuff around. The other thing I want to talk about real quick is, additionally, exercises promotes the release of what we call brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. And that is a protein that supports the growth and maintenance of neurons cognitively. So when you're thinking about, like, hey, are you prone to dementia or some of these other things, we know that it is shown that regular physical activity modulates this stress response system of BDNF, and it improves cognitive function. That's why you feel better afterwards, because it does build that emotional resilience by doing it. But here's the thing, you have to get out and walk. You got to move, folks.
Yeah, it's like preventative medicine almost for yourself, instead of taking a
Holistic. I don't have
pill.
to take a pill or anything. It's holistic. I love it.
Exactly. Instead of taking a pill, you're actively redesigning your neurotransmitters and your neural pathways, and your nervous system. And nervous system regulation is, I mean, there's so much research into it, but like you said, the BDNFs, it's above and beyond, I think, what we understand even now. Like, we're still diving into it as a science, but it's it's all encompassing of what you need. The body knows how to heal itself if you'll follow its direction. Like you said, oh, my back is sore, I don't want to work out. But then if you walk, you feel better. And part of that is the release of hormones. Part of that is actually your nervous system being like, oh, right,
Uh,
this is
I'm
how we need
safe.
to, yeah,
I'm
I'm
good.
safe, I'm okay. Let me reset the actual transmitters in my brain. Let me up the BDNFs and the serotonin and the dopamine. Fantastic. Who needs the high levels of cortisol? Nobody. I mean, some
No.
cortisol is good, but who needs the high levels? Absolutely nobody. So when you're working towards that goal, you really kind of have to think of it as a medicine for yourself, honestly, a preventative medicine and what you're doing. And it's very interesting. There is a woman, a physician, and her name eludes me, but I read her book. I'm sure it'll come to me at some point. I'm like, oh, right, this one.
That one.
I was reading
So I do
that
that
one.
all the time.
That's the lady. I was reading her book. Ooh, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. Still can't remember her name, but I remember the book. So if you're listening to this and you want to look it up, it's called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. And she cites a study in the very beginning that I think was heavily enlightening. We talk a lot about, in mental health, we talk a lot about medications. Um 50-50 on those, right? If you really need them, you really need them. But there was a big study done in Australia. It was longitudinal, it was over 10 years, and they found that the rate of increase in antidepressants went up 300%, and the rate of depression stayed stagnant, which is kind of a telltale of, oh, something needs to adjust. But then when you look at all the studies talking about exercise as a form of treatment and meditation and some more holistic mind body approaches, the rates plummet. So it's really interesting and mind opening to me that we're kind of just now diving deeper into why is that, what are the neural pathways that we're actually working on when we exercise and when we do some of these things. And I hope in the future, my hope in the future would be that that takes over some of these unnecessary prescriptions. I have personal friends who, their therapists have just been kind of like, well, just try this drug, and it's made it worse. And I think it's doing a discredit to ourselves and our providers for these people not to say, okay, well, let's deep dive, and we have this as a backup for you if we need it, but let's talk about some more holistic approaches. Let's talk about prevention in your life and what you're doing. Maybe they do a cortisol test. You can do those. Maybe they do a cortisol test and they see, like your physician did, hey, it's high. You're a ticking time bomb. We got to decrease your cortisol. Well, how do we do it? You know, um, and it's a very interesting science once you dive into those BDNFs and once you dive into the serotonin and the pathways down to the hypothalamus and into the adrenal glands. And I actually have family members who were so stressed that their adrenals failed. And you can do that. You can fail, your body will fail at some point if you
It does.
maintain those
It
high
breaks.
levels. It'll break. And a lot of people, before they get to that breaking point, they're turning to, like you said, some not great ways to release that dopamine, whether that be drug addiction or self-harm. Sometimes, unfortunately, these are definitely things that cause a release, but we need to slowly replace those. So if you're in that point in your life, if you're at that place and you're thinking, I don't know how to get out, right? Go see somebody, go talk to somebody, go outside and take a deep breath, right? You definitely need to work on it. You need to see and talk to people about this, but you also need to recall to yourself that you've reached a point of stress to break your body, and it's not you. There's nothing wrong with you. Your actual physical body is breaking down because you're so stressed, and
Yeah.
it can be adjusted and redirected if we catch it, right? And or if we work to prevent it and prevent further harm. And movement is part of that. Movement is a big healer in preventing further harm to the body and allowing some of these processes to kind of loosen and brighten up and be replaced with better medical chemical work, better neural pathways, just better, honestly.
And regenerative at that point. Yeah. And
Hmm.
I know you have a kid, Liz. So I'm going to ask you, have you ever seen Inside Out?
I have. I love Inside
Okay.
Out.
I love
I
this.
saw it
I have
before I
kids too.
had a kid.
If you're a Pixar person, you've seen it. For our viewers and listeners, if you haven't seen it, it's a good way to go, and you'll get this when I talk about it. But towards the end, anger, right? He's the red guy with
Yeah.
the flame coming out of his head, right? But there was one of these guys that was driving, right, road raging, and he had all four of them. He didn't have any emotion. He just had all anger, just all hammered down. And that's the analogy I would use for me, because when I got
Hmm.
close to burnout, like I was that guy. I had four pieces of anger. They are all floored down. My amygdala is just in overdrive. And it did. I burned out. There's only so hard that you can go. Your body can push itself before mentally you break down. And when you break down, like, it's not a fun place to be, folks. If you haven't been there, please do everything we're talking about today to start, fixing that. But I do think, people need to be aware, like, that's the cortisol, right? That's just constantly going. If I had an engine, my car engine, and all I did all day long was just keep it redlined in first gear,
Yep.
what is going to happen to that motor? At some point, yeah, it'll run, some longer than others, but at some point, it's going to go. It's going to go poof. And when it goes poof, you're left kind of picking up the damage, because, as you mentioned, like for me, and I love being transparent on these episodes, but for me, it was drinking. That was my way to self-regulate,
Hmm.
or I had really bad coping techniques, and it's mainly because I look back and and no fault to my parents at all, but they just didn't instill really
Yep.
good coping techniques in me, and so I carried that into the fire service, and you know, guess what? Everybody was drinking, and so go to a conference,
Yeah.
let's drink. Like, hey, weekends off, let's go drink, and so it became a problem for me. But to fix the cortisol, and I love how you mentioned this, because when I was in crisis, yes, I got put on a lot of meds. They just threw everything at me, I felt like. And some of these meds, I did not like the way they made me feel. They made me
Mm.
feel worse, or just not,
Yep.
not productive or just lethargic, or some of them really kind of spiked up my suicidal ideations and my thoughts of self-harm. But what I want to share with people is I needed those meds to figure out which meds were going to work. And that sometimes just takes time. And that's the frustrating part, because as it takes time, sometimes 4 to 6 weeks for some of these drugs to take effect, you're still sitting in kind of the shit, I like to say. But here I am almost, a little over 2 years later since I started my recovery after my Sentinel event, got sober. Um, I'm happy to announce that today, the only thing I take is an allergy med and some ibuprofen every now and then, because I've been able to find good balance. Now, I needed those meds in order to get to this point. Like, if I didn't have that, like, there needs to be a bridge, but I needed those meds so I could start slowing down, start recognizing things, and then I needed to go to a therapist, right? And so here's my shameless plug I do on every episode. If you don't have a therapist, I highly, highly encourage you to go out and get one. Your average wait is about 4 to 8 weeks to be seen, and you might not even like them. So if you get in a crisis and your amygdala is firing off and your cortisol levels are really high, you're going to be stuck in that crap and that feeling for another 4 to 8 weeks, versus if you have a therapist on hand right now that you just go see. I don't care if it's yearly, but you have someone you can call and say, hey, I'm in crisis. Can you get me in on your next available? More than likely, they're going to work their schedule around, try to get you in as soon as possible, versus someone who's a new patient. It's going to take you a while. And that can be very, very frustrating. So, do me a favor, go out, start looking in and pre-planning, and find a therapist today that you kind of can connect with. So that way, when you kind of get into this, kind of these sticky situations, like, you have the tools to hopefully get yourself out. And it's all about anything else. Like, you would pre-plan going into a structure fire. Law enforcement officers oftentimes would pre-plan before doing a breach on a hostage situation. It's the same type of thing. We just need to pre-plan for ourselves and take care of ourselves. But at the same point, we need to have these coping mechanisms. And I was able to kind of learn over time in recovery, therapy, sobriety, learning, reading, meditation, working out, mental health and wellness. Like, every day I work on my mental health and wellness every day. It's just like you talking about working out and physical fitness. I do the same thing. I do both, and sometimes physical fitness is my self-care, my mental health and wellness, just by going for a walk. And so it's two birds with one stone, but you have to do these practices and stay consistent. And what I can tell you is, it may not work for everybody. So I'm not saying like, hey, if you do these things, like, you're going to get off all the meds that you're on. Yeah. What I'm trying to say is I was able to find other holistic alternatives that eventually led me to where I am today. Now, do I have stressful days? Yes. And if I need to go have a ketamine session, by God, I'm going to go do it. But I have that research. I have that knowledge. If I'm stressed, I'm going to have, I know I'm stressed. I have self-awareness. So it's like, oh, Chris, you're super stressed. You absolutely need to get your butt in the gym and not sleep in, And so those are things that come with time. They're not something that's going to happen overnight, folks. But if you practice it, you do get to that part in your journey. And I can only tell you from my own experience, from where I was kind of in this fog and kind of down at the bottom of this lonely pit all by myself, it felt like, now I'm thriving. I have my ups and down days, trust me, but they are not near as bad as they were 2 years ago when I unfortunately tried to end my life, and that sucks. So if you're struggling, by all means reach out to someone, ask for help, but at the same time, go for a walk. Try these little things that we're doing. Liz, like, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the show, but how do I get out of my head? Because I have this negative self-talk sometimes that demotivates me, and I get these barriers. So how can I address some of these challenges and find that motivation and find that energy to prioritize movement in hopefully my daily routine?
Yeah, so it's like you said, you were kind of talking about work in tandem with the resources that you have, right? And that's what you need to do as well to motivate yourself to get into a daily routine where you're moving and you're hustling kind of every day to make little actionable insights. So it is very hard to get out of your head, especially once you start getting deeper and deeper into depression and anxiety. Some of those things can overtake and overfear them. And actually, my first recommendation to anybody ever is take a deep breath. So what I would used to do, like you said, it doesn't work for everybody, right? You do have to kind of find your own way in the sphere. Everybody's a little different, but work in tandem with some of the tools that you have. So the biggest tool and best tool that we have is actually breathing. I mean, Think about how much we need oxygen. Think about what a driver it is for us. And if you do some diaphragmatic breathing and you think to yourself, okay, this morning I'm going to wake up, I'm going to take a couple deep breaths. That's all it needs to be, just a couple deep breaths. Whether that be you have a note on your nightstand that says take your deep breaths, or you have a little reminder on your watch or your phone, hey, don't forget to take your deep breaths. Start every morning taking a deep breath and reminding yourself what you want to do for the morning and why you want to do it. Some people have vision boards; those are really great. I just beg of people to make them realistic, right? We tend to go way outside of what we really should be doing and get a really unrealistic view of what we're supposed to be doing next. And you mentioned a lot of things and you said, hey, folks, it's not going to happen in one day. And I just want to stress that it's not going to happen in one day. You're not going to read all the books in one day. You're not going to read all the research. You're not going to, to the point of you eventually being able to kind of drop some of those meds. It's not all going to happen in one day. You have to have the bridge from one thing to the next. And I love that you said that. I love that you said, hey, this was my bridge and I needed it. Yes, absolutely. If you need the bridge, whether it be meds, whether it be a personal trainer that you need to bridge with, whether it just be learning how to breathe and how to cope with some of those scenarios. But once you get outside of that, you take a couple deep breaths and you think to yourself, okay, I've committed to walk 5 minutes this week, a day, just little things. Why am I motivated to do that? That's what you need. And I love sticky notes, as you can tell. But even
Yeah.
just a background reminder on your phone that says you want to walk. When I was trying to get rid of some of like the higher sugar stuff in my pantry, I had a little note on it that said, "Are you sure?" That was it. That's all I needed to motivate myself to put the Hershey's bar back. It just said, "Are you sure?" And it's those little things, you know yourself best, right? Everybody motivates differently, whether it be saying, okay, every time I walk 5 minutes, I'm going to put aside $1. And then when I get, $5, $10, I'm going to get myself a nice coffee, or I'm going to, maybe it's if I consistently move for, say you want a longer goal, 6 months, I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy myself a new outfit. You have to find the little motivators for yourself. And that could be mental health and well-being. Take note of how you're feeling that day, kind of at the beginning and at the end for your stress level. It could be as simple as just putting a little note in your phone that says, I'm stressed this morning. And then coming back at night and being like, okay, am I still stressed?
Mm-hmm.
Do I need to go for a walk this evening? Do I need to take some deep breaths? 5 minutes of yoga? How can I manage that down? Because that's my goal. And really, those SMART goals are very important to maintaining the motivation. And pick one SMART goal, not like 5 to 10, not like, hey, I want to meditate and I want to move and I want to read this self-help book and I want to listen to this podcast. And sometimes that works for one person, right? Like I am guilty of doing all the things at once, like fair bet, quite honestly. But if you're somebody who you need to focus on the one thing, just focus on the one thing and have one SMART goal for that one thing and put that SMART goal somewhere visible, right?
And that way you get that win, that way you get that little win.
Get that
like
win.
This morning I was so stressed out. I was like, I got a million things to do, but I was like, hey, the one thing I'm going to do is set up this show. And I got it done. I'm like, yes. And I got it done early. I'm like, awesome. Double yes,
Yeah.
But it can be difficult to prioritize exercise for first responders because I do know the long hours, the irregular schedules, the high stress environments, it does make it difficult. One of our volunteers, Jaron, at Mind the Frontline, I like what he does. So on his phone, and you might not be able, mine's just my truck, but he has a screensaver. He said his phone is a screensaver. So every time he looks at his phone, it reminds him of whatever message he's trying to accomplish. So that could be like, did you do your best this morning? Did you go for your walk? Did you remember to breathe? Like my wife tells me all the time, like I don't breathe because I'll be like, and then, and she's like, I can tell you're stressed. Like, you're not breathing, dude. Like, take a breath, man.
You need to breathe.
But using all these, multifaceted kind of approaches, find what works for you. And, it's just like, I'm like you. Yeah. I will write like, oh, I'm going to get all these things done today because they absolutely all need to get done. And I even tell other people, and now I mean, it keeps reminding me I gotta practice the way I preach. But now, like, it's like I got 20 things on my my notepad, or all these tasks I gotta get done, and I'll circle or commit to 3 of them, because if I get those 3 done, once again, I get a small win. So, hey, if it's just like I'm going to go for a 5-minute walk, or I'm going to stretch, and I like how you put that, like, check in with yourself, because that is part of this. And while you might, feel like you don't have the energy to work out or exercise, I can tell you that by doing something that is enjoyable to you. So if it's going for a walk, or maybe down this little path that you might have by your house that's kind of in nature, like, find something that brings and fills your cup up, folks, because you're more likely to follow that. It might not be, what you want, but it's what you need. And I think you need to really realize the difference. There's wants and needs in life. And what really is hard for us, especially as first responders who are struggling with high stress and burnout, is really, we want to go after it all at once, and we just need to take that step back and just do the little things, because the little things do add up and they do make a difference. And it may not, like, once again, I may want a Ferrari, but what I need is just a car to get me from A to B. And if I just need to be okay with that. And so, once again, this is just doing some self-help work, folks. Like, this is taking care of yourself, becoming more emotionally aware, emotionally intelligent, as I like to call it. But there's ways that you can set and achieve attainable goals. And if there's anything I could stress more, it's get out and move in some way, but set small achievable goals. Because, like you mentioned, if I have a goal of, hey, for every 5 minutes I walk, I'm going to throw $1 in the jar, and then, okay, maybe I go get a smoothie, or hopefully a healthier smoothie. But you can have these little wins. It's like, hey, if I work out 7 days a week, maybe Sunday's my cheat day and I get to have some candy or something like that. You can have these little things, but make it realistic and make it so it's something that you enjoy. So that way it becomes more of that habit, and you're more apt to do that versus being reluctant.
Yeah, and it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time you want to be hitting those goals, and 20% of the time it's fine. You need to have the days where you're allowed to say, I just need to take a break, right? You have to have those. Those are incredibly important to incorporate. But the other interesting thing is, we talk a lot about movement as the general populace and how it reflects, general ideologies of individuals here and there. There's a lot of broad, overarching articles about this that you're probably going to read as a provider. But I think it's important for all providers and EMS to understand you're actually a different kind of breed, right? So there was a study that was done that found that EMS providers, people who go into EMS and kind of sustain it. And I'm not talking about, oh, I've been here a year. I mean, I'm talking about those of us who have been in the field for a couple years, right? Who are getting close to that burnout or whatever. These providers actually have a general personality of wanting to give and not at all wanting to take. And that includes not wanting to burden others with their problems. It includes not wanting to take time from others for yourself. And it includes not wanting to take away what you are perceiving is what you kind of need to do to make all of those other things actionable. And the problem there is you're injuring yourself, right? Because by doing that,
Mhm.
by not telling the person, hey, I'd love to go out for dinner tonight, but I promised myself I was going to work out, so it would have to be later or something. By saying instead, oh yeah, whatever works for you, which is what we're apt to do. I think everybody in the field would kind of admit they're a little apt to be like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want to do, because they don't want to burden that person, right? And it's the same with their
Yeah.
mental health. They don't want to burden them by saying I'm not okay. And it needs to be across the line, telling people, I'm not okay. Hey, my physical health, it's not okay. And it's affecting my mental health. So I need to step back, and I need you to understand that when I'm when I'm on the trucks, maybe because I used to do this too, stepping up and down on the back
On
tailgate
the
of
back.
the
Yeah.
truck to
Yeah.
get some movement in,
I've been there.
please.
I did
Yeah,
calf raises off of that too. Hey, you
yeah,
could do things. You could do push-ups
yeah,
off the back. Like,
exactly.
there's a bunch of stuff you could do with an
Yeah.
ambulance. That's a
We
rolling exercise
I
machine
love
right
it.
there.
It is. But I've told people they've come out and they wanted to talk to me, and I've been like, hey, you can stand here and talk to me. That's fine. I'm not going to stop what I'm doing. Or I need, I'm going to go to the treadmill. If you need me, come get me. But like, I need these 10 minutes. Or could somebody go on the next call for me? I know it's my turn, but it's getting to the end of the day and I'm losing motivation. It's hard to admit that to people. I know it is. I
So
know it's rough, but it's important.
asking for help and setting healthy boundaries is what I heard out of that. I mean, wow, that's
Absolutely.
shocking. I mean, but I
I
mean, we
know.
don't do this shit, you know. But when you read about it, you learn about it, you're like, oh yeah, that's a healthy boundary. Like you need to set these boundaries for yourself. Okay, you know, you need to be able to say no and put your priorities first, and know that it's okay to say no. It's okay not to hit 100%. You know, be graceful with what you have, but you know, we always, and a lot of you out here can listen, that are listening, could probably relate a little bit to this, but you know, it's just the fact of we always want to put others in front of ourselves because we feel
Hmm.
like we're uncomfortable by saying no, you know, and so once you start doing it and make it a habit, like I got a lot of people that always give me crap because like my phone is on constant do not disturb 24
Yes.
7. And the reason why I do that is because one, it does help me with my stress because those notifications going off on my watch or this or that, like it triggers that cortisol, and then I'm living in constant stress. And hey, sorry, like you might be annoyed with my notifications being off, but at the same time, like my mental health is more important than you know. Hey, there's always the option, just push it through. But I always tell people like my notifications are always off. If you call twice, and it's just because those are the healthy boundaries I had to put in place for myself. But I do want to kind of talk a little bit about mindful movement because I do think that when you talk about just movement in general, there's movement and then there's like movement with purpose, which is what I would call
Hmm.
mindful movement, right? Like techniques for cultivating the presence and awareness through, you know, just any type of physical activity. And mindful movement practices are unique in the opportunity to cultivate just that presence of awareness. And it really does, it's like the next level. So start small and then start you know, you can starting some of these little kind of tools of, hey, deep breathing, you know, body scanning, like checking in, like, okay, I'm deep breath. And there's really cool apps out there. Like Insight Timer, I believe is free or it's like $3.99 or something like that. Like I love
Cheap.
that
Yeah.
thing because it helps me sleep and then I can meditate. And, you know, there's the Calm app, like what to you speaking about like checking in with yourself. Like I'll try to do it in the morning and it tells you like, hey, are you happy, sad? You can make a little note, you know, and then I do it again at night. And I can go back and actually look at like my emotional calendar kind of thing on the Calm app and go, oh, like today or this day I was really off, but how am I doing today because of what I did yesterday? Like, okay, well, today's actually a little bit better, you know? And so these are all little things that I think you can work on. But I know that when you marry research with mindful movement, you know, it really just kind of indicates just, you know, the overall reduction of symptoms of stress, anxiety, depression,
Hmm.
even more, you know, and so it's like the next level that people should strive to get to. What has been your kind of experience? Like, what do you do for mindful movement?
So yeah, it's important. The mind body connection, we kind of talked about it earlier. It's the next level. And to do that, you really have to understand what you're moving and how. So I always recommend people when you're putting together a plan for movement, whatever that be, whether that be walking or swimming or whatever, look at the muscles that you're actually supposed to be using during that movement. And it's just a quick Google search. You know, say today you're going to try deadlifts. Okay, well, what muscles am I actually supposed to be using during that deadlift? And then if you actually think about activating those muscles, you will be a little shocked, one, how much actually kind of harder it is to lift that weight because you're thinking, oh, I need to focus on this specific group. But you'll be pleasantly surprised by the results as well, because when you're in your head and you're just moving around, right? You have a higher risk of injury. You have a higher risk of just not completing the movement appropriately, which doesn't really give you the benefit you're looking for, either mentally or physically, right? So when you take a step back and you decide, hey, I'm going to cut my lifting workout maybe to 20 minutes instead of 30 and slow down and really think about the muscles that I'm supposed to be using, everything connects so much better. And I actually had a really interesting experience with this towards the end of my pregnancy. I couldn't move as much. I walked, but I was really intentional when even just when I walked. Okay, what muscles am I supposed to be firing when I walk? Right. And we don't think about it because we just, you walk. Who thinks about
Yeah.
walking when they actually walk? But I kind of challenge everybody listening, go for a walk and really think about what you're doing walking. And I'll bet that in the morning you're actually a little more sore than you realize. But after I had my son, I was I was scared that I wasn't going to have the same level of fitness, which I don't, and that's fine. You shouldn't, quite frankly. But I was also pleasantly surprised by the connection that I had with my body just from having that event, right? Because I had them all natural. So I had to have a big connection with moving and musculature. And I took that as a reset for myself. So I'm not doing any big lifts at the moment, not really big ones. I am focusing when I lift, I do about 3 lifts and I actively think about the musculature and the movement that I'm supposed to be accomplishing and making every single one as perfect as possible. And when you step back and you get into that mindful set and that mindful habit of moving your body mechanically the way it's supposed to be moved, you're increasing the actual nervous system um, benefits is probably the best word for it, but you're increasing those benefits. You're helping those neurons actually grow and fire appropriately, helping the musculature grow and fire appropriately. And then it all cascades downhill in terms of that feeds back into the brain. The brain's like, oh, sweet. So then you release that serotonin, that dopamine, the BDNF increases when you're thinking about mindful movement. And it can be in any movement. And that's the beauty of it. We kind of went back to you can work out in any space. You can mindfully move in any movement. The trick is thinking about it. So don't overstress yourself. Step back, like we said before, take one thing at a time, one thing in stride. Anything that you can complete is wonderful. And even if it's just okay, so this week I'm going to try mindful movement on the one movement, push-ups, sit-ups, whatever, walking. Start there and get really kind of in tune with that connection and then build off of that. So let yourself kind of steamroll down into more and more, and you incorporate it more and more as you go. Um, and what I like to do is I'll write workouts, and then I add mindful next to whatever
You're going to be
movement
mindful for that
I'm going to
movement.
be mindful of for that
That's
movement.
all. And you can start small. Like, for me, it was just like starting small of mindful stretching, right? Like
Yeah,
just stretching with purpose. Like, okay, I want to get this muscle because it's pulling down this sciatica down here and causing me some angry pain back here. And so I started there. And then I even transferred, and that's kind of why I love the pool as a swimmer, is because I get in the pool and there's no distracting. Like you just hear the sound of water and splashing a little bit, and it's
beautiful.
kind of
Yeah.
quiet actually. But what I do is I'm actually very mindful about my stroke. How I rotate my body, where my arms are when I start doing my pull through. And I was a swimmer in high school, and I went through hundreds and hundreds of stroke lessons with my coach. But that in itself, what I find, it just it takes my swimming to a next level mental space. It's just like,
Yep.
and you're right. I feel a lot more sore because I'm not slacking off. I'm actually using the appropriate muscles and basically not using all these muscles that would kind of support that. Or, if you're just kind of slouching. And there's some days where I just go in the gym and I don't use the best movement techniques because I'm just trying to get through a workout. And so once again, it's the pros versus cons. It doesn't have to be every workout. It doesn't have to be every single routine. You can pick, like you mentioned, like, hey, on this one, just go at it and get it done, as safe and to the degree possible. But on this one, like, I'm really going to deep dive down. I'm really going to focus in. I'm going to have those muscles and those synapses fire because I'm really engaging my entire body at that point. I'm engaging my brain, my spinal cord, my breathing, my heart rate, my lungs, my muscles, everything is in tune. And it's actually pretty cool. And that's why I kind of liked it with the stretching kind of part. You see this in yoga
Hmm.
a lot. So, I mean, that's why I think yoga just has such amazing benefits.
Yeah, yoga is fantastic. I recommend it for everybody. I personally use an app called Down Dog. I used it. They had an option for prenatal too, so I used it while I was pregnant, but yoga is wildly beneficial. And that goes back to the science of the mind body connection, and intentional movement and meditation movement. Yoga incorporates all of those. And I find yoga close to be like I was a swimmer too. I that is my favorite thing to do when I work out. But I find it close to that in that if I put on this app, which lets me kind of do nature sounds, It very gently guides you through, but it also allows you to kind of get into that mental space of relaxation. There's a lot of science about sound and sound therapy, which could be a whole nother thing. But if you want to look into it, sound therapy is very cool. We love sound therapy. But it's
Insight
like when
timer.
you listen, yeah, it's like when you listen to the rain or when you're listening to the ocean, people wonder, why do I feel so calm? I mean, it's physically decreasing all those stress hormones and it's actually relaxing your body. So yeah, I'm a big fan of all those and all that movement. And yeah, to stress the point, I mean, I can't say it enough. I never recommend anybody go full bore into any change ever. It's not sustainable. And it won't help and it'll make things worse. And I want people, especially first responders, I want everybody to understand I've been to that place. I mean, I've been to that really stressed, cannot handle, I need to step back. I think I'm not okay kind of setup. And like kind of towards the edge of it, probably like a year and a half into being a medic, when I started to be a lot more responsible for people's complete well-being. Because I had a fallback when I was a basic. We had some serious calls, but there was always the medic there. And then when I jumped into, oh, I'm the fallback, that was a stressful time for me. And I don't think I would have been able to cope back out of it or move back through it if I hadn't incorporated some of these things: breathing, stretching, movement, just small little acts throughout the day. And looking back on it, it's really interesting for me to think, I have all these degrees and all this back, everything in this research, and I know it, but even
Mhm.
I had a hard time putting it in there. So please don't ever be scared to tell people this is my goal. And that does help, get it out there. You don't necessarily have to say this is my goal because I'm super freaking stressed and I don't want everybody to know that. You can just say, "Hey guys, you know what? I decided that I'm going to start doing this." And the more people you tell, the more it comes back on not only a motivator for you, but kind of a personal check-in and standard for yourself. Like, "Oh, I've told all these people I'm going to do this and nobody's seeing me do it. I should do it." Like
I
at
should
least,
probably do it.
yeah,
Yeah,
I should probably do it because
it
everybody
holds you to
knows.
that personal accountability. It's one of the reasons why I tell a lot of people that I'm practicing sobriety, so that way
Yes.
it just helps against the power not to take that next drink. Because for me, like that just it's not good for anybody if I was to do that. But I also like last week I work part time in a clinic doing moderate sedation for a vascular surgeon for some of those procedures. But on their clinic days, like they'll bring in food. And like last week was Papa John's pizza. Don't get me wrong. I love myself some Papa John pizza. Love the cheese bread. Love all of that. But I let them all know like ahead of time, like, hey, I'm really trying to work and kind of I'm one of my goals right now is trying to drop down to 220. Like I really want to get to that 220 rate. So for me, that's a goal. And so by letting everybody know, it was kind of a joke when they brought the pizza and like, hey, Chris can't have this because, and it, it's kind of a joke, but at the same time, it's a good reminder for me. Like, okay, yeah, I told these folks that I'm working on this and therefore I'm not gonna, I brought in my own food. I try to eat a little bit healthier. I'm trying to do little micro snacks, but by telling and arming these folks with that and sharing and saying, hey, I have this goal that I want to get to, they're helping me by basically reminding me like, hey, self accountability. Now, there's also moments of weakness where you can be like, oh, I'm going to have that piece of pizza, but at the same time, it does help, if you share your goals with your family, your spouse, those around you. I do think that what you will find is you're holding yourself a little bit more accountable. Like if I told my wife like, hey, my goal is to work out, 5 days a week or 5 times a week. It doesn't have to be like straight weights. Like I'm trying to mix up cardio with just swimming, or maybe I'm just sitting in the sauna, I'm just moving and doing some stretching in the sauna. Like I just want to get 5 workouts in a week, she's holding me accountable to that. And that's okay. Like these are ways you can build your support system and really build resilience, towards the physical movement and use this powerful tool that we've been talking about. But having some sort of regular movement therapy program, however you want to call it, exercise, whatever you're doing, it does enhance your resilience, right? And a lot of us that
Yeah.
are probably listening, have suffered stress and burnout and all this stuff in the high stress jobs that we do in the service of others. But being more emotionally resilient, it buffers against just injuries on the job, which I can tell you, having a back injury was extremely just emotionally and mentally just devastating to me. Not being able to move, not being able to do what I want, not knowing if I'd ever be
Yeah.
able to go back and be a medic again. Like that in itself was a challenge. So, better work, better working out, staying physically fit, staying healthy with my diet, getting good sleep. Like these are ways to help me with improving my coping mechanisms and just kind of it's nice because I feel like I have a sense of mastery over my body. I'm not saying I'm totally zen and at the level of Buddha, but I'm working at it every day, 1% every day, and I do want to kind of be a master of my own body and my mind and have that self awareness. And so and more importantly, I don't want to have my cortisol levels ever as high as they used to be. And so by having the release of these endorphins and some of these other neurochemicals like serotonin and BDNF, these all help. They reduce my anxiety, they reduce my depression. So and all of those are things that, hey, especially nowadays, like here's my other biggest excuse right now with inflation, everything's expensive. So the more that I can do that's holistic and I can do that's natural, man, I'm actually saving myself money and I'm gauging my health, my mind, my body at the same time. And what better way to do that? So
Yeah.
any other kind of thoughts on just building resilience real quick before we kind of close out the show today?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at resilience in EMS and kind of being anti-fragile and being in that mindset, I really hope that what people take away from this, I know we've kind of jumped back and forth so many things with neurotransmitters, gentle movement, things like that. What I'm really hoping that people understand is there's a lot out in that world, a lot of science in that world. You're going to overwhelm yourself if you jump off of this podcast and you go, "Oh, I'm going to research all the things that they talked about and I'm going to implement them all at once." It's just not
Don't do it,
applicable to
folks.
anybody doing that and working it. Don't do it, folks. But do take away that this is preventative medicine for you. You holistically need to work with yourself and work in tandem with the siloed parts of medicine, because they are still siloed, but create for yourself, create for yourself a little holistic capsule, if you will, of therapy, of movement, healthy eating, like you mentioned. These all play back and upon and in themselves, right? You cannot silo your mental health with your physical health, with your learning and knowledge health, or your self improvement. You can't silo any of those. So when you're looking at incorporating this, like you said, incorporate it into something that is known to you as a habit and work from there. Small things. That's all that it takes. And if you ever think that, oh, I need to spend a ton of money here or there, step back to yourself and say, no, I have my body and I know what's best for my body, and really check in and use that as kind of your guiding beacon light, and then work out from there. So everything that we've talked about is very applicable to you, in the general you, very applicable to you, and you can implement it, but just be understanding and be gentle to yourself when you're doing it. Don't ever walk away from myself or another health professional that has given you ideas, tips, tricks, anything, and say, I have to do it for me because that's what they told me. I want you to take it as a piece of knowledge, put it in the silo, maybe try it, give it a good old college try, not like 4 days. When you implement something, try it for like a month at least. And then if it doesn't work, don't ever be scared or upset with yourself or say that you failed. If you need to adjust it or move on or drop it. So just to have that openness for your body and for your mental clarity to say, you know what, Elizabeth told me to use the truck tailgate to do freaking lunges. Not working for me. Fine. Move on. Move into the next thing. And that's how you'll attain that Zen. That's how you'll eventually get to that point for years. I mean, it's years that it's gonna take you. Not
It's
to
very
scare anybody.
dynamic. I tell a
Yeah.
lot of people that, when it comes to my recovery, like my recovery in the last 2 years has been very dynamic. What I started with when I first came into, after my Sentinel event to where I am now are almost night and day. And I'm sure like in a year, that'll also be night to day where I'm at now. And it's just these small steps that you stack them, you get that 1% every day, but it is dynamic. So what works for me today may not work for me next month. And I need to be okay with, hey, I'm going to adjust. I never try to talk down to myself, because that's one of the things I used to always do when I was stressed out, burned out, and really struggling with my mental health. I was very easily, I was my meanest person. I would just cut myself down. And what I would encourage people is give yourself some grace. It starts with you. Before you could be kind to others, you need to be kind to yourself and be able to kind of walk out in the world and go, okay, hey, maybe this didn't get the results of what I was expecting, because sometimes as we expect things, those don't actually always work or play themselves out. It could be just something like, hey, I tried it. At least I tried it. I showed up. You are still getting the benefits regardless of what you're seeing as far as physical results. As far as if you're trying to go after weight loss, okay, well, maybe you only lost 5 pounds, but how's your mental health feeling? How's your overall cardiovascular health? How is your brain health? And I would challenge you to look at it in that aspect and go, okay, well, maybe I didn't lose 20 pounds, but hey, I feel better. I feel more excited. My energy's up. I'm sleeping a little bit better. Those are ways to look at things. So try not to look at the negatives. Try to highlight the positives in those little wins, folks. Any last words?
Absolutely. Just that you can't help others. You cannot help others and be a beacon to others until you step back and you understand that you need to set yourself right first. So just take that time for yourself, folks. You cannot be there for everybody in all things if you have not taken the time to address your own personal health and well-being. So take the time, please. It's not selfish. It's not, it's not going to hurt anybody except yourself if you don't take that time out. So just do it for you. It's going to be okay. You can do it for you. And that's how you can be there for others.
100% agree. And thank you again, Liz, for coming on today's episode and sharing your knowledge and just having that critical discussion about, healing through movement. And it was just a good reminder for myself on how these little things all add up to really big changes and really big impacts within my mental health, my well-being, and those around me, more importantly. Your knowledge absolutely elevates our mission when it comes to promoting mental health, wellness, and recovery for our first responders. Let's continue to have more of these critical conversations, folks out there. Please listen, please subscribe to the channel if you can, and show us some love. And always, we do accept donations that goes to our peer support team. We do have what we call the Mind Shield membership that you can find episodes like this and state-by-state resources, along with virtual and online peer support. So if you have a chance, go over to www.mindthefrontline.org, like and subscribe to this podcast, leave us a comment so that way we know what you like and what you don't like. And that way, we listen to all those things and we can come up with another episode for the future. Thank you again for being part of the Critical Conversations by Mind the Frontline. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and mind the frontline. To our dedicated listeners, thank you again for joining us on this critical journey. Remember, the Critical Conversations podcast is a steadfast resource for police, fire, EMS, allied healthcare workers, dispatchers, air medical, and military personnel, along with their families. Your support makes the impact of these conversations resonate even further. If you found today's discussion enlightening and want to stay connected with our ongoing mission, please be sure to subscribe to the Critical Conversations podcast. You can find us via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and the Mind the Frontline website. Your subscription ensures that you will never miss an episode, and it's a powerful way to show your commitment to fostering resilience within the entire first responder community. For more information and additional resources, visit our website at www.mindthefrontline.org. Together, let's continue these critical conversations and build a stronger, more resilient first responder family. We thank you for being a part of the Critical Conversations podcast. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and mind the front line.